Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and it's wonderful to see all of you here again. So I thought the best way to start off this year was to make a video about getting into landscape photography and what you need. It's actually really simple. There's only 3 things you really need. And if you already have some of that stuff, great. But if you have nothing, I think that this video will help answer a lot of the questions you might have into how to get into landscape photography specifically. I personally got into landscape photography because it's therapeutic. It disconnects me from everything that's going on around me and connects me with nature. It can be mentally cleansing to, for some reason, to wake up at ungodly hours to shoot the sunrise or stay up and shoot the sunset, maybe shoot the stars, stuff like that. But realistically, it just helps me mentally, and it has for years at this point. And I think that could be really great for a lot of people out there. So if you're thinking about landscape photography, you really don't need much. And that's what this video is going to talk about. So with that said, let's get started. All right, so I just want to start out by saying that this is not going to be a buying guide. I kind of want to just answer questions that are common when you're searching for cameras or lenses or tripods, which are the 3 things that you'll need for landscape photography. But I don't want to focus too much on megapixels or aperture or what brand you need to buy. I will talk about cameras that you can get along the way or lenses that might be good, but don't blindly listen to me and just go out and buy what I suggest just because I'm suggesting it. Watch some reviews, go hold the camera in your hands, go test it out as best as possible. The goal here is to answer questions so you have the knowledge of what's important, not tell you that this camera is the best because of all of these things that you don't understand. I would rather tell you, these are what's important when you're starting out, and then you figure out what works best for you. All right, so you're gonna need 3 things when shooting landscape photography, and they're pretty straightforward. You're gonna need a camera, a lens, and a tripod. We're gonna start this off by talking about cameras, because obviously that's the main thing you need. And if you have nothing and you don't wanna spend any money and you kind of just wanna see if you're into landscape photography or into photography in general, I think the best way to start is with your phone. I actually did a whole episode on this. It was the first thing I ever did on YouTube. And it just goes over how you can learn photography and good ways to just get your feet wet using your phone. But if you've already made the decision, hey, I want to buy a camera, or hey, I already own a camera and I want to get into landscape photography, there's a few questions that always come up that are probably the most important when searching for what you need. And those questions I'm going to go over right now. So let's get started. All right, so one of the first questions you might encounter is, do I need full frame, APS-C, or micro Four Thirds sensor size? And if you have no idea what those are, don't worry, they just describe the size of the sensor that's in the camera. The reality is the pictures you're going to take are going to be great no matter what. However, I do have a few little tidbits of advice, and that is micro Four Thirds sensors are typically in cameras that revolve around shooting video. So I try to avoid those. If you end up wanting a camera that has that, or if you end up wanting a camera that shoots both video and photos, by all means, perfect. Because it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. However, I will say that a majority of the cameras that use that sensor size are more oriented towards video. Now, in terms of full frame, you'll read a bunch of stuff that says you have to go full frame to get the best image quality, blah, 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 blah. I don't think that's necessarily true. Also, full frame sensors typically cost much more. Now, you can get entry-level full frame cameras new, but they're still above $1,000 with no lens. That's why I think overall, you should probably just stick with APS-C. Again, the image quality you're gonna get is going to be fantastic, and I really wouldn't dwell too much on this subject. Also, all the cameras that I'm gonna recommend use APS-C sensors. It's just the best of both worlds in terms of entry-level photography camera, and you're still gonna get amazing image quality, I promise. All right, so the next question you will definitely encounter, which is, what brand do I buy? Nikon, Canon, Sony, Fuji? The reality is, it doesn't really matter in terms of specs or stats. All of the cameras are so similar in terms of image quality that you're gonna get that it really doesn't matter. Some people will tell you Sony shoots better. Some people will tell you Nikon or die. Some people will tell you you have to shoot Canon. Don't listen to any of that. I walked into the store in 2009 after doing a ton of research about what camera to buy. And realistically, there was only Nikon and Canon at the time. And in my budget was the Canon 50D and the Nikon D300. And I think the Nikon had slightly better image quality, but the Canon had something else. It was slightly cheaper. I don't necessarily remember exactly the exact comparison, But I spent so much time looking at which one was better and realizing that they're so close that it really didn't matter. So what I did was I walked down to the store and I held them in my hand. I used them and played with them. And even though they were stuck to that stupid security thing, so I'm like hovered over the counter trying to use the camera, I spent a good 20 to 30 minutes just playing around with both of them. And I decided on the Canon camera because I just liked the way it felt in my hand. I just liked the way the menus were and how I could change settings. I didn't know what the settings meant at the time. I had a little bit of knowledge, but I just liked the way it felt, and that's what I ended up going with. And I think that's probably more important than anything else is you want to enjoy the camera that you're shooting with. You want to take the camera, you don't want it to get in your way when you're shooting. You want it to be a part of the fun, a part of your experience, not a distraction or something that you have to tackle every time you go out to shoot photos. Now, all of these brands are going to make decent cameras that way, but what really matters is what you enjoy, what you want to hold in your hand and take photos with. Because if you're learning, you're not going to want to go out and shoot landscape photography if every time you think, I really don't want to use this camera. And if you don't have access to a store, try to watch maybe a review or two that talks about the ergonomics, talks about how it feels, talks about how nice it is to use, and focus less on the megapixels or how great the dynamic range is or anything like that. Because the other really important thing about this decision is that you're very likely going to stick with the brand that you pick. So if you are just going to buy a camera and a lens and you have no aspirations to go farther, well, then it doesn't really matter. But if you have any desire or any possibility of buying extra lenses or buying a camera in the next 5 years to upgrade from it, it will matter what you end up buying because it's very likely you're going to stay with that brand. Now, obviously you can switch, but it is kind of a pain. So it's really important that you just enjoy the way the camera feels and how you're going to use it. Because the reality is all the brands are going to take fantastic photos. So that's my advice on deciding what brand to buy. All right, so the last thing you might encounter that's a pretty big deal is DSLR versus mirrorless. And I think this was definitely a debate a few years ago, but I don't think it's even close anymore. And I think the answer is mirrorless. The problem is you're going to find in the sub $1,000 category, there's still quite a few DSLRs made mostly by Canon that are in the entry-level photography world. What I'm trying to do with this video though is set you up for your future, for your photography journey, if you're going to take it to more than just buying one camera and that be it. Because I don't want to suggest something to you that will become obsolete. And the reality is DSLRs will become obsolete. Now, in terms of image quality and everything like that, they're still going to take comparable things. So it kind of goes against my suggestion that any camera will take a good photo. Any camera will take a good photo, but the reason I'm specifically suggesting mirrorless is regardless if they both take good photos, many of the manufacturers are moving towards only producing mirrorless lenses. Hell, Fuji and Sony only make mirrorless cameras to begin with. So that's why I think it's best to advise people that are getting into it now to buy a mirrorless camera, learn on a mirrorless camera, because that's going to have the best results. It's also just going to be the best for your photography future. And that's it. I mean, this is coming from me who I shoot all my main photos with a DSLR. But if I was getting into photography right now, I would definitely be getting a mirrorless camera. That's just the future, regardless of if they both take equal images. That's just where the market is going and probably what you should get. Now, I think the only caveat is if you find a nice used old DSLR that is perfect to learn photography on and it's a great deal, don't hesitate. Do not fret. It's still going to take amazing images. Just know that if you want to buy lenses or if you want to upgrade the camera later, they're probably not going to keep making DSLRs. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so what cameras do I recommend? And again, I'm going to remind you this is not a buying guide. I'm not comparing these cameras to each other. I'm not trying to tell you which one is better. I'm actually just going to guide you in the way that I think is important for photography and what you should be looking at when you're looking at a specific brand or a specific camera. Everything in this is under $1,000. I've never used any of these cameras. So again, do your research based off of what I'm saying if you're into a camera or you think that's the one that you want. The other thing is they're all kits, so they come with a kit lens, which I'll talk more about in the lenses section. But first, let's get started. All right, so the first camera I suggest is the Fuji X-T200. And again, I'm not really suggesting this specific camera. I'm more talking about the brand or what you'll find from that brand. And the one thing I always hear about Fuji is just how much people enjoy shooting on the cameras. I don't really hear that about Nikon or Canon or Sony, and that's not to imply that those cameras aren't fun to shoot on. But I know a lot of people that have switched or bought a secondary camera or just happen to have a Fuji to film their videos on, or they shoot film and they want a digital camera, so they buy something like the X-T200. And everyone says that it's just enjoyable to use. I have an X-T4 myself, and I think the majority of the people really enjoy it because it has all of these tactile dials and things that you can do on it that just reconnect you with photography. So I think that's one reason Fuji might stick out from everyone else, is because they might be more fun for you. They might be more enjoyable for learning photography on. And the second reason I think Fuji is really good is because all of their cameras are APS-C. Disregarding, they make medium format cameras that are $5,000 to $10,000, but most of their cameras are APS-C, meaning all of their lenses will just work. You don't have to worry about, will this lens look correct, or is this a full frame lens, or is this an APS-C lens? And it's just pretty straightforward, and that might help you in your journey as well. That's pretty much why I would choose Fuji. All right, so next up is the Sony a6100. It is a fantastic little camera. It's the most compact out of all the ones I'm listing. However, you will find that it is probably the worst form factor out of all the ones I'm listing. A lot of people don't necessarily enjoy shooting with it, but it is a fantastic camera for the price. The other great thing about Sony, especially if you start with this camera, is that they all use the E-mount. Now, the lens that will come with this camera is for APS-C lenses, but I read and looked this up to make sure you can use full frame lenses on the a6100. And what this means is that there's just potential room for you to grow. You can have the a6100, buy a more expensive full frame lens, and then move up to a full frame camera later on, keeping that lens. And I think that's important. Just keep in mind that the a6100 is a fantastic camera, but it might not be as fun as something like the Fuji or the Nikon, or something like that to shoot on, just because of its form factor. All right, so next up is the Nikon Z50, and I'm just gonna start off by saying Nikon is probably the company I know the least about in terms of their cameras. Not to say I don't know stuff about them. I looked this up. Seems to be a great camera. It is the entry level to their new mirrorless line, and so that it uses the same lens mount as all their other mirrorless cameras, which is great because that means there is room to grow. And if you're noticing the pattern here, I'm not trying to suggest which camera is better than which. I'm trying to give you a guide on, or, knowledge on what camera or what manufacturer will give you room to grow in the future. So what this camera means is that if you buy this camera and then upgrade your lens while you have that camera to a more expensive lens, that means that in 4 or 5 years, when you possibly upgrade the camera, you can keep that lens around and still use it. I think that's really important. The one caveat for Nikon that I would be somewhat concerned about, and I'm probably going to get flamed to no end in the comments, is just where their future lies with photography equipment. Now, I'm not going to get into the debates or get into speculations. Again, I could be completely wrong, but there is evidence to suggest that they may decrease their market share and may decrease their investments in photography equipment. I'll let you do that research and you can make that decision for yourself. That's just my opinion there. All right, so last but not least is the Canon M50 Mark II. But this is where things get a little tricky. And it's that Canon has created a divide between their mirrorless systems, where their entry-level stuff uses their M-mount, which is like the Canon M50 Mark II or the Canon M6. And they make some lenses for it that are apparently fantastic, but everything is technically entry-level. There is no room to buy those lenses and then upgrade your camera and then use those with your camera. So there's not really any room to go beyond entry level if you buy into this system, which I don't really understand. Technically, you could buy a Canon RP, EOS RP, and that could be your starting point. But the problem is that body's $1,000 without a lens. So I don't really want to suggest it in comparison to everything else I suggested. And also technically you can get adapters for the M series Canon, but I don't really know why you would want to jump through those hoops when you have all these other great options that I've listed. So at the end of the day, even though I'm a Canon shooter, I'm filming on a Canon and I shoot on a Canon for photography, I don't think I can suggest Canon here for a starting camera right now. I just don't understand why they don't offer a mirrorless camera that doesn't use this M mount and it uses their more professional series stuff, so that gives you room to grow in your investment. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I don't think I could suggest Canon here. If you end up finding a nice DSLR, like I said, that's either used or on like a really good sale, it still might be worth it for your money. But if you're trying to buy new and you're trying to think about your future as a photographer, I don't think I can suggest Canon's system as of right now. All right, so I was just editing together the video that you're watching and realized that it is far too long. It's like 25 to 28 minutes for the whole thing. And I just decided that it would probably be best to just break it into 2 parts, make it easier for you to consume. Maybe you can just watch the parts that you think you need to know the most about or anything like that. I just felt like that was just too long for one video. So this is me from the future. I'm a little bit brighter because I'm filming during the daytime. And overall, I hope that the continuity break doesn't interrupt what you've learned. And I hope that you check out part 2, which will deal with lenses and tripods. And there's a slight bonus in there right at the end. So make sure to check that out. Regardless, if you've made it this far and you want to check out part 2, you can subscribe. But realistically, just hitting the like button on this video helps me out the most. And I cannot thank you guys enough for the continued support and your viewership and all the nice comments that you guys leave down below. So thank you, and I'll see you on part 2. Later.